thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Karoline Lende. I'm a software engineer at Multiverse, completely unrelated to the metaverse, but we'll get back to that later. The title of my talk is Building an Interview Scheduler in LiveView, a newcomer's journey from despair to delight. I'd like to start with a little show of hands to see who thinks I came up with this title myself and who thinks I used ChatGPT to come up with it. So hands up if you think I came up with it myself. Cool, thank you. And hands up if you think I used ChatGPT. Okay, it's pretty 50-50 split. I did actually use ChatGPT for this. But it did take quite a lot of tweaking, so I promise I didn't use it to write my whole talk. I did think that I could take a bit of inspiration from this, though, and so I thought, let's try and use DALL-E to have some nice imagery for my presentation. And first of all, I just pasted in this whole title of the talk. That's what it gave me. Not the most inspiring imagery. I don't know why it's got the letter J everywhere as well. So I thought I should be a little bit more specific. How about a cute cartoon character that's going through a journey from despair to delight? Then it gave me things like this. It's clearly struggling a little bit to convey both despair and delight in the same image. So I gave up on that a little bit. But I'm not here today to talk to you about DALL-E or ChatGPT. If you wanted to hear about that, you should probably go to the other talk. I'm here to talk about interview scheduling. Now, why interview scheduling? Well, at Multiverse, our mission is to create a diverse group of future leaders by building an outstanding alternative to university and corporate training. So what that means is that we offer apprenticeships for tech roles. And the whole process of going through an apprenticeship, from applying for a job to getting hired, going through all of your learning to completing your apprenticeship, is supported by Multiverse, the platform, which is built in Elixir. And that's what I work on developing on a day-to-day basis. Now, in order for companies to hire new apprentices, they need to conduct interviews to find the best candidates, and we help them do that with our platform. So when I joined Multiverse 1 year, 3 months ago, we were just in the process of revamping our interview scheduling tool. And the new tool was going to be built in LiveView. I was a complete LiveView newbie when I started working on this. So today I'm going to talk about my experience and key takeaways from working on this feature. Why is it relevant to you? Well, hopefully it's going to give you some tips and pointers on things to consider when developing complex LiveView apps, and also for you to get to see a cool example of what you can build with LiveView. So the kind of 4 key takeaways I'm going to cover is how you can use diagrams to map out complex state management, the importance of having a strong Elixir foundation and understanding how to use Ecto and Phoenix to connect your UI to your database, how you can work cross-functionally with designers to get the most out of your LiveView app, and also understanding the LiveView model and how to handle things like latency with CSS. But first, let's take a bit of a step back. To understand what I was building, it's useful to take a look at the database structure that was already in place. So at the top level, we have the concept of interview stages. They can have a name and a duration and a few other properties. So for example, for a software engineering role, we might have first a recruiter screen, that's 30 minutes, then a hiring manager interview, a tech test, and then your final interview. Each interview stage can have many interview availabilities. They're linked back to the interview stage with an ID. They have a start time and an end time, which importantly needs to be longer than the duration of the interview stage so that you can fit at least one interview in that availability. So for example, we could add some availability for the recruiter screen on Monday from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. And each availability can have several interview bookings. They're linked back to the availability with an ID as well. They also have a start time and an end time, but they can be different from the start and end time of the availability. And they also have an application ID, which links it back to a candidate. So for example, we could have me, Karoline Lende. I have booked a recruiter screen interview on Monday from 2 to 2:30 p.m. But the work I was mainly focused on was building a page that allows Multiverse managers and clients to add their availability to conduct an interview. And that would then allow candidates to book in an interview slot. So we already had a lot of this functionality on our platform, but it was all internal facing, just for Multiverse employees. So the kind of process was that Multiverse employees would email clients, they would send back their availability, Multiverse employees would put it into the platform, they would then email candidates, get their availability, and book their interviews. Very manual and clunky process. So part of this work was just working towards increasing self-serve so that our clients could log in directly onto the platform and add their availability themselves, and the candidates could then go and book their interviews themselves. But I was mostly focused on the interview availability part of this. So like I said, we already had some existing functionality. This is what the existing interview availability page looked like. Just a caveat here, this was a legacy internal page. It was created before we had any designers. It's safe to say it wasn't really in line with our brand anymore. It was only used by internal Multiverse staff. But you can see here you've got this kind of linear view. Can I use the laser? Yeah. Linear view of the week here. You've got the different interview stages with some availabilities. If you click add, then you can add one availability at a time. It's not great really. It's not quite what we want to do anymore. We don't really want to put this page in front of our clients. The eagle-eyed amongst you might also see that it was built in Elm. That's a whole other story, but this was a good opportunity for us to revamp and improve this page and at the same time make it into a LiveView page. So here is a nice new design that I was working towards, a new tool for inputting interview availabilities. So you can see there is a kind of nice calendar view. You can see what interviews are scheduled for each slot. And then you can go into kind of edit mode in the form, and then you can add and delete slots. You can toggle between different months. It's all very nice looking. And actually, before I kind of drag you into a deep hole of despair, I just wanted to show you that there's light at the end of the tunnel, and just show you what it looks like today. So let me try and do this. This is going to be a bit tricky because I just realized the mouse is going to move over here. This is our demo environment. This is the page today. I'm on a specific interview stage, and I can go back in time. I can see what it looks like if an interview has been scheduled. I can go to a future week. I can add availability. This must be really painful to watch. I can delete a slot. I can add a slot. Anyway, you get the idea. It works now, which is very nice. But when I first started working on this feature, it was my first time using Elixir. It was my first time using LiveView, and it was actually also my first time doing front-end development. So definitely a very steep learning curve for me. So fast forward a few weeks into me working on this feature. This is kind of how I felt. Not particularly good, a little bit desperate. Why was that? Let's take a look at an example. There's a video here, and I apologize because it's a little bit blurry, but I wasn't able to kind of film it again. I filmed it a long time ago when I was working on this feature, but I'll just try and talk to you what's going on here. So you can see kind of bare bones version of the availability page. You can see there are some slots that are being displayed there. I can go into edit mode, and then if I go a few weeks into the future, then I can start adding some slots. All that's good. I can select a start time. And then, I get a little error message, which is annoying. You can see that the end times have updated. So the first end time is 9:30 a.m., I think, from memory. Then I can add another slot. And what you're going to see now is the start times have updated. So you can't add an overlapping slot, which is nice. That's kind of the functionality we want. But now if I click really quickly, I'm able to add an end time that's 7:30 a.m., which is before the start time. That's obviously shouldn't be possible. Then you get an error, but also the start time disappears. It's clearly not working as expected. Now the end time disappears. There's all sorts of bugs happening. And now I try to add another slot. This time I'm going to try and add one. I get some new error messages, actually. They've changed. And now I'm going to try and add a slot that is shorter than the duration of the interview. That's also something that shouldn't be possible, but in this case it is for some reason. And now if I click that, I don't even get an error message. The start time disappears. It's all a bit, I'm not really sure how to fix all this stuff. I have actually, can I go on to the next one? Yeah, so I have a second example, another quick one. In this case, we've fixed those annoying error messages, but you can see there are some other weird things happening. In this case, I was basically just playing around with it and trying to break it as much as I could, and I could break it in many ways. So you'll see here at the top, I'll add a slot, and now I'm trying to delete the one underneath, and 2 of them disappear. It's obviously not great. But then in the bottom one, I can delete. Now, if I try to add another one at the top, then you'll see when I try to delete that one, the start time is still there. So yeah, there's all sorts of weird behavior going on. It's not great, really. I don't really know how to fix this. So, like I said, there were a few key lessons for me that turned despair into delight. And I also learned how to be a bit more specific to DALL-E about what emotion I wanted to have in the images. So that was a nice bonus as well. The first key takeaway, maybe an obvious one, but using diagrams was very helpful. I think as an engineer, it's very tempting to just jump straight into it and start coding. And in fact, that's what I did. But when I later went back and started drawing out some diagrams, everything became a lot clearer. So let's have a look at some examples. Here is a state diagram of the whole page. So you can see here at the very top, you can select a stage. When you've selected a stage, if there's any availability, then you will display it. You can increment and decrement the week, but if you're in the past, you shouldn't be able to add any availability because that doesn't make any sense. If you're in the future, then you can get into edit mode of the form. You can add a slot, you can change the start and end time, you can delete a slot, you can save, we validate. If there's errors, we display them. Otherwise, we go back to viewing. And just having this to refer back to when building and kind of understanding the different flows through the form was very helpful. Another example, so I talked about this concept of having kind of view and edit mode of the form, and then it also needed to have a concept of time to know what was the past and what was the future. So this is kind of what I'm trying to draw out here. So imagine it's Wednesday, Monday and Tuesdays in the past, we want to add some availability for Thursday and Friday. And this is kind of all the different ways in which you can display an availability. So if there's no availability, it always displays in the same way. It's just some gray text, no availability has been added. Also, if it's in the past, like I said, you shouldn't be able to edit it, so it always looks the same, and it's just grayed out like this. If we're in view mode in the future, then you can display a kind of static future availability like that. And then we get into this area where you're in edit mode and you're adding availability. If you have an availability that's already persisted in the database, we had this constraint that you shouldn't be able to change the start and end time. So therefore, we've just got these selects that you can't interact with. But if you add a new availability, then you should be able to add a start and end time for it. And I could, again, use this to kind of map out the logic of how we build up the HTML in the form. So we're looping through each day in the week, and then we're kind of displaying availability per day. And for each slot, if we have any, we'll loop through them and see whether it's in the past or not. If it's in the future, it displays like so. If it's in the past, then it displays grayed out. We also need, in edit mode, some hidden form inputs, which is a bit of a rabbit hole I won't go into, but it's just required to preserve existing slots and keep Ecto happy. And then we've got the future availabilities as well. So again, having this to try and think of the logic of how to build up the form was very useful. And finally, I talked a little bit already about the concept of these dynamic selects. In this case, they're actually working. There were kind of 2 acceptance criteria. Our availability needs to be at least as long as the interview stage duration. And we also shouldn't be able to add any overlapping slots. And again, kind of working out the logic of how to calculate start and end times was quite gnarly. And so it was really useful to draw out some diagrams for this. So in the very simplest case, we have no existing availability. You select a start time, and then your end time needs to be at least 1 duration after, and then it could be every 15 minutes after that. You might have some availability before. That means you can't put a start time within that availability, so it needs to be after. Or you could have some availability after, so that kind of restricts what your latest end time would be. Or you can have availability both before and after. And just drawing out all these different scenarios to think about how to calculate your start and end time was, again, very helpful. Second key takeaway, maybe also quite obvious, but having a strong Elixir foundation. As a newbie, I found this very important, and I didn't really have a strong Elixir foundation when I started working on this. But in Phoenix and LiveView, you have lots of kind of magic form functions that allow you to tie your front end and your inputs easily to your back end and insert them into the database, mainly using change sets. But if you're new to Elixir, understanding those magic form functions and change sets can be a little bit tricky, especially if you're dealing with nested data like we were in this case. So let's take a look at what that meant. In our index file, we had these 4 event handlers. So you can add a new slot, you can delete an existing slot, you can change the start and end time, and you can save your slots. Now let's have a look at my first attempt at the change time event. This is very small. You're not meant to be able to read it. I've just put it on the slide to show you how long this function was, and very complicated. If we take a bit of a closer look on just the top bit here, you can see it's a change time event. We're taking some information in from the form, and then we have a bunch of information that we're carrying in the socket. We've got like a map of edited days. We've got some information about the stage. We've got a change set from the stage, and then an availability struct. And then we just start doing all sorts of weird transformations and mapping to get it into the format we want. It works, but it's really hard to read. It's very easy to introduce errors. It's really not great. So to kind of understand how to fix this, it's useful to look back at our database structure. When I started working on this, I kind of saw everything from the perspective of an interview availability, because it's a form for adding interview availabilities. So you have a change set to add interview availabilities. But actually, it's a form for adding several interview availabilities and deleting at once. So it makes more sense to look at it from the context of the interview stage. And once you do that and understand how to do that, it becomes a lot easier. So after some help from colleagues, this was what the new change time event looked like. So a lot simpler. You just take in information from the form. In this case, we've called it interview stage. You pass that on to your interview stage availability change set, and you just assign that to the socket, and that's it. So much easier. And if we look at this availability change set in a bit more detail, you can see that we are not casting any attributes to the interview stage because we're not updating that. And then we're using this cast assoc or cast association function to loop through the availabilities and add them to our change set. And then we're delegating to our interview availability change set. And we're also adding on the interview stage here so that we can validate the duration as well. So doing this just makes a lot more sense because it's so much easier to add and delete multiple availabilities at once. But understanding how to use this cast assoc function was really not intuitive when you're new to the language. So for me, it was kind of just all about going back to the basics, Elixir Schools, Ecto Lesson 1, and kind of take it from there. So my first attempt at event handlers, new slot was 61 lines, change time 73 lines, save was 79 lines. Now, can I have a little show of hands? Who thinks afterwards I reduced the number of lines of code by 30%? Who thinks I reduced it by 60%? Yeah, some of you. Who thinks 90%? You're kind of all right, actually. New slot went from 61 to 38, 37% reduction. Change time, the one I showed you, was the best one, 73 to 6. And save went from 79 to 33. So just, yeah, getting that foundation and understanding how to use Ecto properly made a massive, massive difference. Third takeaway is tweaking the design. We had a really great design, but there was one key issue with it that I've shown here. So you can see that we're in edit mode, and you can toggle between the weeks as well. So imagine that I have added a little slot on this page, but I forgot to add the end time. I go forward a few weeks, I add a few more slots, I hit save, but there's an error. But the error is on a different page of the form. So you need to direct that user back to where that is. And what if there's errors on multiple pages? It's not very good UX, really. And it also means you have to carry all of this information that isn't being displayed anywhere on your form. So it makes the code really complex. There was a very simple fix. We just decided to deactivate these buttons when you're in edit mode. So that means that you can only add availability for 1 week at a time. But actually, that's not a massive compromise in terms of UX, because that's probably what you would do most of the time anyway. And it just makes all of the logic and code behind it so much simpler, because you don't need to carry all this extra information that's not being displayed. And you don't need to worry about how you're going to direct your user to where the errors are. So just working with a designer and coming up with a simple tweak like this, again, made a huge difference. Finally, this might seem like quite a small thing, but actually it made a pretty major difference in our case, and that is how to handle latency with CSS. So remember all that buggy behavior that I showed you at the beginning? Well, a lot of it was actually just caused by not disabling inputs whilst information is being passed through to the socket. So that means that if I click on this end time really quickly, then it hasn't had time to update the end times yet. And that means you can select an invalid end time, so 7:30, which is before 3. And that was causing all sorts of errors and other buggy behavior. So I knew that in LiveView, when a phexchange event is sent to the server, your parent form tag gets this phexchange loading CSS class. But I didn't actually realize that you needed to manually specify what the CSS class should be. So in our case, it was actually as simple as just adding these few lines of code to our Sass file, which means that your select can't be interacted with when it has this phexchange loading class. And you can just see here what that looks like. You can't interact with that end time until the times have updated. And that's just a start, right? You could also add loading spinners and progress bars and all sorts of other things if latency is important in your app. So those were the 4 things I wanted to cover: using diagrams, having a strong Elixir foundation, tweaking the design, and handling latency with CSS. And I didn't even talk about time zones, so that's a whole other issue. But all of this might be completely irrelevant after Chris McCord's talk tomorrow, which is all about improving dynamic nested forms in LiveView, which sounds like exactly what we needed a year ago. So very excited to hear more about that. Our availability page is now live. Since it went live, we've had more than 1,600 availability slots added and more than 1,000 interviews booked by candidates. So clearly a massive win in terms of saving time, both for Multiverse and for clients and candidates. One final thing before I open up for questions. If you enjoy this talk, then you might also enjoy this book that my colleague is currently writing, Chris. It's called the Phoenix LiveView Cookbook, and it's got kind of tried and tested recipes for solving common problems in LiveView. He's a big LiveView fan, and there's a URL there if you want to sign up for the very exclusive waiting list to see when it's available. That's everything from me, so thank you very much for listening.
All right, thank you. We have time for questions. Any questions? Yes.
What do you consider the hardest part of nesting ecto change sets? Like, is there a possibility to improve the documentation about them, or are they not intuitive? And at least the current part, because as you said, we will learn about the new and shiny thing tomorrow.
Yeah, I think what I kind of found missing in the documentation was like a full worked example that kind of shows you how to do like nested change sets in Ecto, but linking it to a form that's displaying in LiveView. And kind of, we did lots of Googling and searching on like, how do you do this thing in LiveView with the nested inputs? And there were very few examples that I could find online. So I think like that's what I find the most helpful, where there's like a worked example you can go after. So I think that's something we could get better at, kind of adding more examples to our documentation.
Thank you. All right, we have time for one final question. Going once, going twice. Okay, thank you. No.
Too late.
Too late, sorry. Okay.